2 months ago, I started this channel with a video talking about my experience building a Chrome extension and why it ultimately failed. Long story short, it was an extension to help users clean up their Gmail inboxes, but cost-prohibitive red tape on the Gmail API prevented me from being able to fully verify the app. The response, however, was not what I was expecting. I made the video just sharing my experience, hoping maybe others can learn from my mistakes for their own projects, but to my surprise, a lot of people were interested in InboxWiz, the actual project I made. I started getting hundreds of messages, comments on YouTube, I was getting emails, people were opening issues on GitHub, I was even getting some reviews on the Chrome Web Store, and I had a feedback form set up for when people were uninstalling. I would ask them why they were uninstalling, and I started getting tons and tons of feedback there as well. And we very quickly maxed out the 100 user limit for unverified apps on Google Cloud, and it went from kind of not working to not working at all. Even though I had already basically given up on the project, all this renewed interest and feedback inspired me to take another look. I already had an idea floating in the back of my mind, doing everything through browser automation instead of using the Gmail API, so I decided to give it a try. Lately, I've been exploring some different architecture patterns for software, particularly in mobile development, and one I've used a few times is clean architecture. There's a lot of debate going on about whether it's useful or just overkill, but there are certain elements of it I like and I've adopted into some of my projects. The basic idea behind it is that there are 3 layers to your app: the data, domain, and presentation layers. The presentation layer is all the UI and state management. The domain layer is where the business logic lives, which focuses on what should happen, but not how. It connects the presentation and data layers. This is where your data models are, and this is also where you have repositories, which are abstract classes or interfaces that are just basically collections of function signatures saying, what needs to be done, but not how. Now, the data layer is where the actual how happens. It's the concrete implementation of those repositories, whether that means sending to a database, calling an API or backend, or something else. The main thing that attracts me to this pattern is the clear separation of concerns, which enables us to easily swap out one piece of the project without affecting anything else. That's the reason this pattern came to mind for this project. We wanted to switch out our data layer from the Gmail API to browser automation. And in theory, we could even keep both implementations and switch between the two, and that's exactly what this architecture pattern allows for, because the domain layer doesn't care how the job gets done, just that a function gets called and returns the right result. But here's the catch. Chrome extensions don't work like most other platforms. In something like a mobile app, everything runs in one execution environment. In a Chrome extension, however, you've got multiple contexts. We have the extension UI, in our case, the sidebar. It runs in its own environment, and it has no access to the DOM, in our case, the Gmail page. The content script, however, runs inside the web page, so it can interact with the DOM, but it can't access most of the Chrome APIs. And the only way those two environments can talk is through Chrome's message passing system, which allows them to open shared channels and listen to each other's messages. So that adds another layer of complexity to our architecture model. If the UI tries to call a Gmail repository directly, it doesn't have the access it needs. So to solve that, I introduced a new layer I called services. The repository still lives in the extension context, but instead of doing the work itself, it sends a message to a service that lives inside the content script. The service handles the actual DOM interactions and sends the results back. That way, we can still keep the clean architecture style. The UI only talks to the domain, and the domain doesn't care whether the data comes from the API, automation, or something else in the future. With this structure in place, the whole project felt a lot more clean and organized and way easier to maintain. So finally, I was able to push this second version of InboxWiz that didn't rely on the Gmail API. There were still some bugs here and there, but overall it was a huge improvement compared to not working at all. But here's the thing that surprised me the most. People weren't just trying out the extension, some were actually opening pull requests on GitHub, even while I was still in the middle of the revamp. Some people were finding their own bugs and submitting fixes, but a lot were submitting fixes to issues I had opened, the ones I had been using to keep track of bugs and feature ideas, and since had kind of abandoned. I had contributed to open source projects before, but this was the first time I found myself on the other side as a maintainer, and that felt completely different. Suddenly, I wasn't just writing code anymore. I was reviewing other people's changes, merging pull requests, and realizing that this project was starting to take on a life of its own. And that really changed how I thought about open source. It's not just about throwing code out there and hoping someone finds it useful. It's about the community that forms around it. People found Inbox was genuinely useful and thought it worth it to put their time and effort into improving it long after I had moved on to other things. And that's the beauty of open source. Even if the original creator steps away, the project doesn't have to die. Other people can step in, carry it forward, and make it better than it ever could have been if it had just stayed mine alone. If you're a developer, I'd really encourage you to get involved in open source. Even if you're just starting out, there's always a way to contribute. Maybe it's fixing a small bug, updating documentation, or adding a feature you wish existed. Maybe you could even start an open source project of your own. Even if it's something small, you might be surprised at how many people find value in it and how a community can grow around it. If you want to follow along as I keep sharing my software development journey here on this channel, feel free to subscribe and come along for the ride.